Former President Nelson Mandela spent most of his political life championing reconciliation. So what does it mean to celebrate December the 16th, a day after Madiba's funeral? We're joined by Jan Hofmeyer from the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Jan. We have made significant strides in terms of reconciliation as a country. Can we quantify that progress?
Yes, Joanne. At the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, we do an annual survey called the South African Barometer or Reconciliation Barometer Survey. And in that survey, we try to gauge South Africans' opinions around the issue of reconciliation and also the broader process of social cohesion. Now, what we see in that survey is that we are still quite a fragmented society. About 54% of South Africans say that they never or rarely socialize across racial lines, and about 41% says that they never talk to somebody from a different racial group. Yet what we find interesting is that the majority of respondents, about 61%, says that we have made progress along the lines of reconciliation in South Africa. And that's quite interesting, and I think we also have to ask why this is the case. And I would argue that part of it has to do with the windfall of our transition and also the specific emphasis that was placed on reconciliation since 1994, and then specifically also the persona of people like Madiba that was attached to the concept of national reconciliation.
But what does that survey of yours suggest? I mean, it seems to suggest that although there are opportunities for us to mix, perhaps we choose not to, or I mean, can we really avoid it? Because let's face it, even if we choose to avoid it, there are people of all races and from all backgrounds in our workplaces. On the domestic front, we do mix with people of other races all the time. Why is it that reconciliation hasn't really taken hold as we would have hoped it would?
You know, I think what we've seen since 1994 is that there were various personalities that really were exponents of the values of reconciliation and the ethic of reconciliation. But what we are realizing sort of increasingly is that we cannot really reconcile in South Africa if we do not overcome some of our major barriers. And when we ask South Africans, what do you think causes the biggest social division in South Africa, the majority of respondents responded that that's inequality, it's social inequality, that people cannot interact on an equal footing if they feel that they're materially unequal. And therefore the majority of respondents, about 28%, responded that the difference between rich and poor is a major source of division. 52% also says that South Africans cannot reconcile if we do not have some form of economic redress in South Africa. So reconciliation has to be addressed at the interpersonal level, but it's also important to address it at the policy level as far as economic policy is concerned.
We look at these events that have united us all as South Africans. We go back to the milestones in our history, and they were giant milestones: 1994 elections, the 95 Rugby World Cup, the 2010 Soccer World Cup, and of course in the last week or so, Madiba's passing. Now, once these are over, we appear to fall back into our old divisive patterns. But does that suggest to us that during these times we step out of the reality of our lives? So there are these moments of euphoria that allow us a parallel reality almost from what we face on a daily basis. And once those are over, we struggle to translate that into the mundaneness, really, of daily life.
I think a person like Madiba is something that is a personality that united us as South Africans. And I think it's one of the few sort of personalities that made us sort of come together and sort of jointly also share our ideas and our desire for reconciliation in South Africa, and therefore we also were drawn into shared spaces in this past couple of weeks, in stadiums, in streets, and we jointly also watched the process of mourning. But what inequality does in a society, it separates people, and what we have in South Africa is that the majority of South Africans still live in racially homogeneous neighborhoods. And what we see is that where integration does take place, It is mainly in the middle class. In other words, those people that are economically and socially mobile, people that can transcend spaces from one point to another. But what we see is that people who live in impoverished areas, especially rural areas, do not get exposed to these levels of integration in South Africa. And therefore, the imperative for economic reform is also an imperative for national reconciliation. We cannot reconcile in South Africa if we do not address the longer term and the structural underpinnings of inequality.
Well, can the reconciliation project survive without a mascot like Madiba? Clearly, reconciliation doesn't appear to be one of this administration's most pressing concerns.
I think this should be our task henceforth. We have seen that the idea of reconciliation has been an idea that has largely been attached to people like Madiba and people like Archbishop Desmond Tutu. It's also associated with the process of the TRC. But I think as we go forward, it has to be something that joins us together, the quest to address poverty and inequality in South Africa. This should be something that draws us together as a nation. That should be also how we pay homage to the legacy of somebody like Madiba.
We consider ourselves a fairly reconciled country, but is that the reality for everyone? I mean, a lot of people reflect on the transitional period, they reflect on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and they feel that they just didn't get out of that process what they were supposed to. And without that kind of resolution, without that catharsis for them, reconciliation has just been something symbolic. It's really been a pipe dream for many South Africans.
Indeed, I think for many people it has been the case, and I think if one looks at the TRC process, which was a fairly short process, and it did not manage to address everybody's concerns at the time. But I think one also has to remember one does not only deal here with the short period of apartheid, but also a prolonged legacy of colonialism. So it's a long-term challenge. But I think, as I also mentioned just now, I think that the imperative right now is to address the structural issues that underpin inequality in South Africa, and therefore also still entrench patterns of separate interaction.
Yeah.